Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Today we're going to kick off another two-part series, and we're going to talk about making financial decisions. We talk a lot about decision-making in this process of becoming a faithful steward. Most of that decision-making is rooted in our understanding of ownership, that we do not own these resources and we need to be subject to the owner. We need to be listening and obeying the owner's direction. But so often, what drives our financial decisions when we're not operating in that faithful stewardship mindset is coming from outside sources. It's coming really from things that are influencing our emotion. They are thoughts that are given to us by marketing companies that you deserve these things, you have a right to this experience, everyone should get to do this or have that thing. And so it's just normal for you to spend money on these things. A lot of times those influences might be from family or friends that are around us, this emotional charge to keep up with the Joneses, to look like other families, to experience life in the way that other families are experiencing it. And social media in particular has driven a lot of financial decisions that are rooted in living what we see now as an attainable life, because people are posting the most extreme versions of the best life you can live. We are watching example after example, scrolling through our phones of people taking wild vacations. We're seeing product after product advertised to us, and it's so overwhelming that we assume that because we see it so often, it must be what everyone else is experiencing. We have these influences of other people's opinions, what kind of car you should drive. Maybe you experience that based on the assumption that you should drive a very modest, very humble car. Maybe people around you are driving luxury cars, and the assumption is that that's just what everyone in your circle drives, and so you need to have a car like they have, or you need to live in a house like they live in, or that your parents lived in, right? We're constantly being influenced by these outside forces that are telling us what we should do, what life should look like for us. And so much of our decision-making is framed by those outside influences. We cannot escape those influences. They are everywhere. But the decision of what we do in response to those influences is ours and ours alone. We need to get really good at making clear-headed, responsible, thoughtful decisions with really solid reasoning, rather than just emotional decisions that are in response to these outside influences. I tell people all the time, when we are in this place of faithful stewardship, one of the most important characteristics of a faithful steward is that they will be able to tell the owner of these resources what we did with his resources and why. And if the answer is, well, because everybody else did it, or because there was a lot of ads that were scrolling on Facebook that were telling me that everyone else enjoys this, so I just felt like I deserved it, those aren't good enough responses. We need to get better at sifting through all that noise and making decisions that are rooted in that responsibility to the owner of these resources. A lot of our decision making is framed by our family of origin. How your family managed money will very, very clearly predict how you will naturally default in your management of your own money. When we think about our experience as a kid, if there were no limits and everybody got what they wanted and Christmas time was just a sea of presents and there was no disappointment allowed, then in reality, in real life, as you step into your own experience of your resources, this is going to be a tendency that's hard to fight against. If disappointment is not allowed, then you need to buy your kids things even if you can't afford it. Or you need to buy yourself things even if you can't afford it, because disappointment was not part of the equation. It is really hard a lot of times, particularly as you're getting started in your adult life, to live the lifestyle that your parents were able to afford. Sometimes your parents weren't even able to afford it, but you didn't know that. You weren't in on that conversation. And so you just assumed they had the money, but they didn't have the money. They were racking up debt and they were spending beyond their means, but you were never in on those details. And so you just assume this is the lifestyle that's affordable. We should be able to do this, even if you can't. Maybe you grew up in a family where you were told that there's never enough, that we're always behind, that, even if they had plenty, they acted like there was scarcity and they were in trouble. And so you have this deep-seated fear, this embedded emotion of anxiety and fear around spending money on anything. And everything that you experience feels like an indulgence. And you tell yourself you don't deserve it, you shouldn't have it. And so these extremes a lot of times can come together in families, and then we've got to figure out together how we're going to reconcile those two experiences and have a shared experience going forward. And so those decisions will default to that hardwired programming that came a lot of times from your childhood. And so when we think about how this all feeds in, the bottom line is that there are emotions that always drive our actions. Our emotion is what determines the action that we take. And so those emotions will drive decisions without a whole lot of direction and thoughtfulness. We will just act. And a lot of times I'll talk with families and they'll have this perpetual spending habit. And I'll ask them, where is that coming from? And they don't know. They can't pinpoint it. It just keeps happening. And it's super frustrating for them, but they don't know why they continue to make these decisions. The truth is those decisions are emotionally motivated. And a lot of times those emotions are triggered by things they don't even fully understand. I think of Pavlov's dogs. There was this psychologist that would ring a bell and feed dogs, and ring a bell and feed the dogs, and ring a bell and feed the dogs. And eventually, if he just rang the bell, the dogs would start to salivate because their brain was hardwired to expect food. They had been classically conditioned to respond to the bell. We are very similar in that when we have these emotional triggers, we make decisions we don't understand because the bell went off. And that is such a painful experience when the bell is repeatedly going off and we find ourselves spending, doing what we traditionally call retail therapy. A lot of that is rooted in emotion and emotional management, and it is very hard to unpack and dismantle, but it is a big reason why we do what we do. I would argue our emotion is the vast majority of why we do what we do. And so we need to understand what we're feeling, what that emotion is that's driving those decisions, and then we need to back into where that came from. How does that continue to happen? What is motivating us? We have these motivations that are rooted in our emotional experience that drive a lot of those decisions. And so those motivations are love, power, security, and freedom. And you'll recognize just even in those words, the emotions that are attached to them. Money can be a way that we show love to others. We're buying gifts. We're meeting needs. We're taking burdens off of them. And we're showing them that we love them by relieving them of pain or showering them with pleasure. It can be motivated by power, that our significance, our authority, our sense of status is rooted in our wealth. We can be motivated by this sense of security. We want to be safe. We want to feel like we can run into any of these setbacks that might come our way and we'll be okay. We want to have confidence. And so we will sacrifice all pleasure, all delight, all enjoyment just to always be safe. Or maybe we're motivated by freedom, where the enjoyment and the delight and the beauty is infinitely more important than any sense of security, because we don't want to not feel happy, right? All of these decisions that we're making are rooted in those emotions that we're experiencing. And a lot of those come from our background. And so in order for us to make better decisions when it comes to money, we need to be able to recognize these emotional triggers, to recognize where these emotions that are driving these actions are coming from. And they're generally rooted in our thoughts. What are we thinking? The thought that we're having is what's driving those emotions, and those emotions are determining our decisions. And we don't slow down enough to ask the question, what are you thinking? What is happening right now? If I have the thought, I deserve to experience what everybody else is experiencing, or I deserve to take that kind of vacation, or I have earned that, that is going to drive my decisions. And it doesn't matter if I can afford it, because I deserve it anyway. If I'm having the thought I'm inadequate, or I'm insignificant, or I have failed, and I need to somehow overcome that failure, I'm going to be spending money to buy something that looks like success in order to overcome that thought that I'm a failure. So we need to recognize the emotion that's driving the decisions, but in order to make different decisions, we need to understand the thought that's actually leading to that emotion. And when we see that thought, we can start to understand whether that thought is true, whether it aligns with Scripture, whether it's actually a thought that God would have about us or about His resources. We can ask the question, is that thought serving you? Is it moving you forward in your faithful stewardship, or is it holding you back? Wherever that thought has come from, whether it's an outside influence at your family background, whatever that influence is that's bringing you to a place where you're having that thought, we need to be testing those thoughts. This is why Scripture tells us to hold every thought captive, to renew our minds, because so much of this decision making that feels emotional, because it is rooted in the thoughts that we're having. And if we think a different thought, we have a different emotion, and we make a different decision. We will have a hard time controlling emotion, managing emotion, keeping those decisions from happening if we never back into the thought that's creating them in the first place. Once we've established what that thought pattern is, we can start to train ourselves to have a different thought. We can take that to the Lord and say, I keep feeling inadequate, Lord. I keep thinking that I'm insignificant. Help me to believe the truth that I matter, that I'm valuable. Or I keep thinking that I deserve to enjoy and have delight and never feel pain. Help me to understand the reality that the human experience, the normal human experience, involves a whole lot of discomfort. And it's okay. And it's in that discomfort that I grow. Once we can see where those thoughts are coming from, then we can actually do the work to have a different thought. And when I have a different thought, I am significant, I do matter, then that emotion that I was trying to manage by buying success dissipates, and I can make different decisions. But we cannot expect ourselves to make different decisions with the same emotion, because the emotion is driving those decisions. We need to think different thoughts that lead to a different emotion in order for a different outcome to actually be available to us. And so I know that got real deep in the weeds around what traditionally would be called cognitive behavioral therapy, right? We're in the weeds of thoughts and emotions and actions. But I think this is so critical, because when we go to the practical of building a spending plan and managing trade-offs and organizing around our non-negotiables, we need to be thinking thoughts that will give us the motivation to do that work. In order for us to put restrictions and limits and say this far, no further in our spending plan, we need to be able to come against the thought, I deserve. In order for us to manage trade-offs and really grab hold of the things that matter most to us, we need to be able to recognize that the thought, this is the most important thing and nothing else matters, needs to be embedded. These are the things that matter to our family. These are the things we really want to take hold of. We need to be able to grab those thoughts that will hold tight to those things in order to come against all the distraction and all the ads and the constant noise that's telling us, yeah, but this is important too, or you'd be really happy if you had that. It's the thought, this is the stuff that matters the most to me, that allows those other things to be truly understood as unimportant. And so it's the renewal of our mind, it's the taking thoughts captive that actually sets us up to make much, much better decisions. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.